On March 8, 2014, Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370, a state-of-the-art Boeing 777, took off from Kuala Lumpur, carrying 227 passengers and 12 crew members bound for Beijing. But before long, alarms started sounding in Kuala Lumpur. Less than 40 minutes into the flight, the plane vanished from secondary radar, and its transponder had stopped broadcasting its location. There was no distress signal, no emergency transmission, no sign that anything had gone wrong. So how could a fully fueled modern passenger jet with an experienced crew simply disappear without a trace? Over the next 6 hours, the plane continued flying southward across the Malay Peninsula and out over the Indian Ocean. Now we know that because after losing radar contact, someone on board shut down the transponder and the plane made a 180-degree turn and flew back over the Malay Peninsula and out over the Indian Ocean. Despite vanishing from civilian radar, military radar and satellite pings or handshakes from Inmarsat allowed experts to reconstruct a probable flight path. They traced the route until it disappeared over the southern Indian Ocean, an area larger than Texas and Oregon combined, leaving behind one of the greatest aviation mysteries of our time. Despite extensive searches by multiple nations, only a few pieces of debris like this wing flaperon have been confirmed to be from MH370, and after more than 8 years, there's still no official conclusion about what happened to the missing plane or its passengers. Today we'll start at the beginning, when the plane left the Kuala Lumpur International Airport at 12:41 a.m. local time on March 2014. Then we'll track the flight as new details emerged, looking at the evidence, the theories, and what still remains a mystery. As the plane approached its cruising altitude, air traffic control handed over communications to the Ho Chi Minh City Approach Control. At 1:19 a.m., the pilots reported their position at 35,000 feet, cruising and proceeding direct to the waypoint known as Ikea Vec. This is the last time the plane and its pilots were heard from. At 1:21:30 a.m., the plane was expected to pass over the Malaysian military radar station at Penang, but it never did. Shortly thereafter, the transponder stopped broadcasting the plane's location. As protocol dictated, air traffic controllers switched frequencies with the pilots to acknowledge, and they never responded. They tried again, no response. The controllers then realized something was seriously wrong and immediately sent an alert. Then at 2:15 a.m., Malaysia Airlines issued a statement saying they had lost contact with the plane. By 10:24 a.m., a military radar station in the Indian state of Andaman and Nicobar Islands picked up a blip on its radar. Now we know that the plane was traveling south because after disappearing from the primary radar, someone on board turned off the transponder and the plane made a 180-degree turn and flew back over the Malay Peninsula and out over the Indian Ocean. We know that because of satellite handshake data from Inmarsat, so we know the plane was somewhere over the Indian Ocean. But why? To find out, investigators used the limited data they had to build a possible flight path. To help them narrow the possibilities, engineers at Inmarsat, a British satellite communications company, analyzed data from their 7 geostationary satellites positioned around the globe. When a plane flies over these satellites, it sends signals back and forth, allowing ground stations to pinpoint its location. On that night, MH370 pinged off 3 Inmarsat satellites, sending data that indicated the plane was over the eastern Himalayas, Indonesia, or the southern Indian Ocean. To explain this data, Inmarsat offered 2 possible flight paths, but later, when investigators reanalyzed the data, they realized that neither path was accurate. Instead, the plane followed a much more southerly track, but they couldn't figure out why. Investigators also had some limited data from a Chinese military radar, which showed that at 2:21 a.m., it detected a plane heading roughly southwest, away from the Malay Peninsula. It would have taken the plane away from the normal flight path toward Beijing, but investigators needed more information. Enter Mark van Honacker, a pilot and expert in calculating flight paths. He estimated that if the plane was actually headed southwest at 35,000 feet, it should have started turning right around 2:30 a.m., suggesting that the plane had flown past the waypoint Ikea Vec and was following the Great Circle route to its destination. In other words, the plane was still flying to Beijing, just a little further south than planned. That would mean the plane had to turn right to line itself up with its final destination, which is inconsistent with radar data showing a left turn away from the Malay Peninsula. So to reconcile the differences, Van Ooyenakker proposed a longer flight path with the plane first turning left and then right. But to make that work, the plane would have to make a 180-degree turn 100 nautical miles southwest of the waypoint Ikeavik. He sent his calculations to officials who ran them through their own models. They came back with a probable flight path that ended over the southern Indian Ocean. But that didn't account for the Chinese radar data, which showed the plane traveling away from the Malay Peninsula. It wasn't until 2 weeks later that someone finally made the connection. The Chinese radar data wasn't for a plane departing Malaysia. It was for the same plane returning to Malaysia. Someone had fed the data set backwards, and once corrected, it fit perfectly with Vinarenko's calculations, confirming that the plane had made that 180-degree turn and crashed into the southern Indian Ocean west of Perth, Australia. But why did it go down? The plane was fully fueled, its technology was up to date, its pilots were experienced, so why did the plane crash? One leading theory is pilot suicide. The pilots may have intentionally flown the plane off course and crashed it into the ocean. But why? Investigators believe both pilots had recently trained on a simulator to fly long-haul overwater flights, perhaps indicating they were preparing for something. They may have chosen a route that avoided airspace controlled by other nations, ensuring they wouldn't be intercepted before reaching their target. And they may have turned on the autopilot system to keep the plane on course and depressurize the cabin to ensure the passengers and crew would pass out before the crash. Other theories exist, including hypoxia, where a lack of oxygen would render the pilots unconscious. Mechanical failure seems unlikely, given the sophisticated nature of the plane, and the fact that it flew for hours after supposedly failing. Hijacking or cyber attack have also been considered. Some wilder theories suggest the plane was shot down by the US or Russian military, or that aliens took the plane for their own nefarious reasons. None of these theories have been proven. In the end, the plane was probably flying just as planned. Something went wrong, and the pilots may have lost control of the plane, or they may have deliberately crashed the plane. Either way, this wasn't just a disappearance. It was a chain reaction of system failures. First, the manual shutdown of the transponder wasn't automatically flagged or tracked. Second, the lack of real-time GPS. At the time, commercial planes weren't required to stream live location data. Third, the delayed search. Initial assumptions and miscommunication between Malaysia and China wasted crucial early hours. Fourth, the focus on primary radar data instead of the Inmarsat handshake data, which was available 4 days earlier. Fifth, the radar blind spots between countries allowed the plane to fly undetected for hours. All of these failures compounded, offering very few clues as to what really happened. So where does the case stand today? In 2017, after searching more than 120,000 square kilometers of ocean, the Australian government, who led the underwater search, announced they were suspending the search. Since then, the only news involving the case is Ocean Infinity, a private company hired by the families of the passengers and crew members who said they would resume the search with improved autonomous underwater vehicles. They claim the new technology will allow them to cover twice as much ground as previous methods. Their new target areas include the Broken Ridge, which is 1,000 meters deep, based on drift analysis and satellite reprocessing. But it's unclear when the search will begin or when we'll get answers. More than 8 years later, the question remains, what happened to MH370? You can see why authorities and investigators initially thought the plane was still en route to Beijing. The plane flew for hours after disappearing from radar, which suggests the plane wasn't experiencing any problems. Then there's the issue of the satellite data, which suggested that the plane was still flying toward Beijing. Finally, no one would knowingly divert a plane off course for hours and then crash it into the ocean. But as time went on and no wreckage was found, investigators were forced to rethink the possibilities. Ultimately, we may never know what really happened. But as always, I want to know your thoughts. What do you think went wrong? Tell me in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to check out more stories like this one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.